There are moments in life when you realize it's no longer worth explaining yourself, justifying your choices, or trying to convince someone who has already decided not to understand you. That's where Stoicism comes in, not as some cute theory to sound wise, but as a real turning point. Because when you start practicing true self-control, when you stop reacting and begin observing, everything changes. And it changes in a way that makes certain people, especially those used to manipulating, extremely uncomfortable. A narcissist, for instance, cannot stand losing control. He feeds off your reactions, your doubt, your efforts to be accepted. But when you break that cycle and stop giving him what he wants, and when you go silent not out of weakness but out of strength, it eats him alive. He needs your insecurity to keep playing the game, and when you no longer play, he loses power. What most people don't understand is that Stoicism isn't coldness. It's clarity. It's not indifference. It's focus. You're not shutting yourself off from the world. You're just no longer letting the world decide how you feel. And that kind of posture is intimidating, because most people still live on autopilot, reacting to everything, chasing validation, bending themselves to fit where they don't belong. But once you step out of that, you become a threat. The power of someone who doesn't need to prove anything is nearly unbearable to those who live for appearances. When you refuse to be emotionally controlled, when you understand that real freedom lies in not depending on other people's approval, everything shifts. And it bothers them. It bothers because it shows it's possible to be firm without being aggressive, to earn respect without raising your voice, and that true strength is knowing when not to respond. The Stoic doesn't ignore pain. He understands it, he watches it, he accepts it, and moves on. And that, to a narcissist, is terrifying. Because he expects drama, chaos, reaction. He expects you to lose control, to explain yourself, to beg. But when you deliver silence instead, when you give presence instead of reaction, it's like cutting the oxygen of someone who lives to suffocate you. The beauty of it all is that this power doesn't need to be shown. It's felt. When you change from the inside, the world senses it. Your relationships shift. Your conversations shift. You begin attracting a different kind of energy because you're no longer operating from lack. You no longer seek external validation because you found something inside yourself that no one can take away. And of course that's going to bother people. Some will say you've become distant, cold, arrogant. Let them talk. The ones who felt comfortable with your suffering will be confused by your peace. The ones who used guilt to manipulate you will be rattled by your firmness. And all of that is a sign you're on the right path. Because the silence of someone who's found themselves speaks louder than any explanation. But this path takes courage. It's not easy to break old patterns, to stop trying to please everyone, to risk being disliked. But that's where freedom lives. When you finally understand that your peace is worth more than any approval, you stop trading your sanity just to fit into other people's expectations. Then you begin to notice, it wasn't the world that changed. It was you. And that inner change reflects on the outside. People who once treated you like an option start drifting away because there's no more space for them to manipulate. People who once diminished you start respecting you in silence, even if they never admit it. Because your posture speaks louder than 1,000 explanations. Stoicism isn't an escape. It's a meeting point with yourself, with your essence, with what truly matters. It's stepping away from the noise to finally hear what your soul has been trying to say all along. And once you find that, there's no going back. What used to trap you no longer has strength, because now you're the one steering the direction. And the narcissist? Of course he'll try to destabilize you. He'll use everything he has to provoke you. But you're not the same anymore. What used to hurt you now teaches you. What used to make you explode now brings you calm. Because you've understood that the control he thought he had was just the illusion of a power you once handed over. Now everything has changed. Because now you know, true power isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself. And that, my friend, is something no one can take away from you. There comes a point where emotional silence becomes louder than any confrontation. You don't need to explain, argue, or convince anymore. The mere absence of reaction shakes the ground of someone who once thrived on your vulnerability. And the Stoic mindset? It's not about being above others. It's about not being below your own peace anymore. That's where the power lies. Not in dominating, but in no longer being dominated. When someone who once had full access to your emotions realizes that their words no longer pierce, it rattles them. Narcissists thrive on chaos, especially emotional chaos. They push, poke, prod, and expect a performance. But when that curtain closes and you stop playing the part, it terrifies them. They realize their influence was a leash you finally decided to cut. Your ability to stay grounded while being provoked, to not lash out when attacked, that's what begins to disarm them. And it's not because you're ignoring the situation. You're just refusing to let it define you. You've detached their power from your emotions, and in that silence, they feel the weight of their own emptiness. You don't have to speak louder to be heard. Sometimes the quiet shift in your behavior says it all. When you stop chasing validation, when your worth no longer depends on being seen or heard by the wrong people, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability for a narcissist is like a mirror they can't manipulate. This Stoic power is subtle, but piercing. It doesn't need recognition to be real. It's in how you don't flinch at passive aggression, how you don't entertain drama anymore, how you protect your energy like it's sacred, and because it is. And they hate that. They hate that you're now immune to their games. They'll test you. Of course they will. They'll try every trick that used to work. The guilt, the charm, the fake vulnerability. But when none of it lands, when your eyes don't reflect that old confusion, they begin to panic. Not because you've changed, but because you've returned to yourself. That kind of inner comeback is powerful. It doesn't announce itself. It just moves different. You're not trying to win anymore. You're trying to be free. And freedom, real freedom, scares people who only know control. The moment you stop giving power to opinions that never built you, you start building something unshakable. Narcissists hate stability in others, because their entire identity is rooted in emotional disruption. Your peace is a threat, your boundaries are a rebellion, and your silence? That's a war cry they can't respond to. Letting go doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've stopped fighting battles that were never yours to begin with. It means understanding that not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every jab needs a counter. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all, and you begin to realize you never needed their permission to be whole. You just forgot how strong you were when you stopped depending on their broken lens to see yourself. Now, the reflection is yours, clear, unfiltered, and finally honest. That honesty can be uncomfortable, because you see who they are without your excuses. And you see yourself without their distortion. You're no longer a pawn in their story. You're the author of your own. And in this new narrative, they don't get to write your emotions anymore. The most dangerous version of you isn't loud or aggressive. It's the calm you wear after healing, the indifference that comes from self-respect. And that, more than anything, is what they fear. Because the person you've become is untouchable, not because they can't reach you, but because you no longer invite them in. There's a moment when you realize that not reacting is not weakness, it's control. Real control. The kind you can't fake. And when someone used to your emotional availability suddenly meets your stillness, they don't know what to do with it. It's not silence to hurt, it's silence to protect. Yourself, your peace, your growth. What most people don't get is that the Stoic shift doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of being burned enough times to stop reaching for the flame. You stop arguing not because you've given up, but because you've outgrown the need to be right in places where truth doesn't matter. And that evolution? That rattles every manipulator who thought you'd never change. There's no louder response than a changed version of you. Narcissists remember every button they once pressed, every reaction you gave them. And now, they press those same buttons, but nothing happens. No breakdown, no desperate explanation, just nothing. That's the kind of silence that echoes. It's a cruel irony for them. The drama they used to feed on is now a desert. No more emotional buffet, No more predictable breakdowns. You've closed the kitchen. You don't serve reactions anymore. And they hate that, not because they care about your silence, but because they can't control it. You start to notice how they try harder, not because they love you, but because losing control over you is unacceptable to them. They don't want you, they want access to your energy, to your attention, to your doubts. But you've locked the gate, and now they're on the outside, knocking on a door that doesn't open anymore. There's a strange peace in not needing closure. You stop chasing apologies, explanations, and confessions that were never coming anyway. Instead, you build your own resolution, quietly, on your own terms. That kind of healing is private, but its impact? Public. It changes the way you walk into rooms, the way you speak, the way you carry yourself without flinching. And when they see you again, calm, unaffected, unavailable, it crushes them. Because what they couldn't destroy, they couldn't keep. And now, what they once underestimated is standing tall without them. You weren't weak. You were loyal. But now you're wise. And that wisdom is the one thing they can't fake, borrow, or steal. You begin to understand that peace is not the absence of noise. It's the absence of need. When you don't need their validation, their attention, their chaos, you win. You win in a way that can't be posted or explained. You win by being unbothered, by choosing peace every time they try to drag you back into war. Even the way you say no now hits different. It's firm, it's final, and it doesn't need an explanation. You no longer ask for permission to protect your own sanity, you just do it. And that boldness, that courage to walk away, stay quiet, set limits, that's the version of you they never prepared for. Because they counted on your pain, your fear, your patterns. They never expected you to become someone who values peace more than people, especially people who feed on your pain. But now they see it. Now they feel the distance. And the truth is, they always knew this version of you was possible. That's why they worked so hard to keep it buried. This kind of power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It lives in your decisions, in your discipline, in your refusal to be dragged into cycles you've already healed from. It's not about revenge, it's about release. You're not trying to teach them a lesson, you're just done learning theirs. And maybe they'll talk. Maybe they'll twist your silence into arrogance or coldness. Let them. You no longer carry the weight of being misunderstood. You carry your peace, your clarity. And from here on, that's all that matters. Healing doesn't come with applause. No one celebrates you when you finally stop bleeding for people who never brought bandages. But in that silence, in that personal rebuild, something unshakable starts to grow. And it shows, not through words, but in the way you stop chasing what's already told you it doesn't want to be caught. They never expected you to get tired. They were so sure you'd always come back. One more apology. One more explanation. One more chance. But that version of you is gone. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to walk away from what drains you. That kind of shift, that scares them more than anything. When someone loses the version of you that tolerated their chaos, they go through their own storm. They panic. They scramble to find the cracks where they once slipped in. But those cracks are sealed now, patched by boundaries, reinforced by self-worth. They can't enter where there's no more access. They'll try kindness now. Sweet words, maybe even apologies they once swore they'd never say. But look closely. Is it growth or is it strategy? Because change without consistency is manipulation in disguise. And you're no longer fooled by shiny words that lack real weight. What hurts them the most isn't your absence. It's the realization that you finally saw them clearly, that the fog they used to wrap you in is gone. And once you see someone for who they really are, you can't unsee it. You can forgive, but the blind loyalty, that doesn't return. This journey turns you into someone different, wiser, sharper, quieter, not cold, but calculated. You don't waste energy anymore. You don't explain yourself where there's no respect. You don't beg where there's no effort. And that version of you? It's the one they always tried to prevent from surfacing. They weren't afraid of losing you. They were afraid of you realizing you never needed them. That's the truth most won't say out loud, because if you'd known your own strength from the start, their games wouldn't have lasted so long. But now you do. Now, you see it. And you're not going back. You start to notice how peace feels awkward at first, like silence after years of noise. But then it grows on you. It wraps around your decisions. It reflects in your routines. You're not fighting to be seen anymore. You're simply living, and that, for someone who used to control you, is unbearable to watch. There's a quiet confidence in no longer reacting, not ignoring, not pretending, just genuinely not being affected. You've detached, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And that detachment is your shield now. It doesn't make you heartless. It just means your heart has learned what and who is worth beating for. They'll say you changed, that you're not the same, and they're right, you're not. You evolved. And evolution doesn't ask for permission. It happens when survival demands growth, when pain stops being a lesson and becomes a decision, the decision to never repeat it again. This kind of change doesn't make you better than anyone, but it does make you better than who you were. You stopped tolerating confusion. You stopped accepting less. You stopped waiting for someone to become what they never planned to be. And that shift, that's what they can't undo. You're not looking back anymore. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just with understanding. You needed that version of them to meet this version of you. And now that you've arrived, you're not turning around. You've got peace to protect, a future to build, and a self to finally honor. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you that needed them. The version that explained every silence, overthought every reaction, and kept holding on even when it hurt. That version was easier to manipulate, but that version is gone, buried under all the times you had to rebuild yourself alone. Now you understand. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person, and that truth stings. Not because it hurts anymore, but because it's clear. Crystal clear. You gave too much to someone who only knew how to take. And now that you've stopped giving, they feel empty. But that emptiness was never yours to fill. You don't want revenge. That's not what healing gave you. You want distance, peace, consistency. You want the quiet mornings where you don't wake up anxious. The calm evenings where no one is criticizing your tone, your choices, your silence. You want your life back. And now you have it. They'll try to re-enter not because they care, but because access equals control. And without access, they lose the ability to shape your emotions. But you've changed the locks, not out of spite, but out of necessity. You've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reinstating someone in the same position they abused. It's strange how peace feels foreign at first. You question it, test it, sabotage it even, because you were conditioned to believe that love had to hurt, that connection had to come with drama. But now you're relearning everything. And it starts with this. Real love doesn't demand that you shrink. Your silence now speaks volumes. Not the silence of suppression, the silence of strength. The kind of silence that says, I don't need to explain myself to someone committed to misunderstanding me. You're no longer available for conversations that go nowhere. You've unsubscribed from chaos. And here's the truth. They always knew this day could come. They saw the strength in you long before you did. That's why they worked so hard to keep you confused, apologetic, small. But strength doesn't stay buried forever. It waits, patiently, until the day you finally say, enough. That enough changes everything. It shifts the energy in every room you enter. You no longer walk with your head down. You don't apologize for existing. You don't mold yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold someone like you. You just walk in truth. Finally. And with that truth comes clarity. Clarity about who you are, what you deserve, and what you'll never tolerate again. That's the part they didn't expect. They thought if they broke you enough times, you'd stay broken, but they underestimated how powerful healing could be. Now, you value peace like oxygen. You protect it, defend it, choose it, even if it means being alone. Because loneliness with peace is better than companionship in chaos. And once you taste that kind of calm, nothing loud can tempt you again. You don't explain your distance anymore. You just distance. You don't beg to be heard. You speak when it matters. You don't need to be understood by those who refuse to see you. Your presence is no longer permission for mistreatment. It's earned. And if it's not respected, it's removed. This is the new you. Not harder, but smarter. Not colder, but clearer. And this version doesn't settle. Not for breadcrumbs, not for half-love, not for temporary fixes. Because you've learned, sometimes painfully, that the only person who can save you is you. There's something terrifying about someone who no longer seeks validation. It shakes people who built entire dynamics around your insecurities. The moment you stop asking, explaining, or waiting, that's when your power becomes undeniable. Not loud, not aggressive, just immovable. You didn't become cold, you became awake. You finally saw that some people didn't love you. They loved the version of you that served their needs. You were never truly seen, just used. But now you've turned that energy inward. What once went to fixing others now goes into building yourself. And they feel it. That withdrawal of your emotional investment hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Because they don't just miss your presence. They miss the power they had when you were unsure. Now that you walk with certainty, they have nothing to hold on to. You used to feel guilty for saying no, for pulling back, for setting boundaries. But now you understand. Self-respect sometimes looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like blocking, unfollowing, walking away mid-conversation. Not to hurt them, but to protect yourself. You've finally stopped betraying your own peace to make others comfortable. And what used to break you now builds you. The same patterns, the same tactics, the same manipulative cycles. They don't pull you in anymore. You recognize them instantly, like smoke after a fire you've escaped. And this time, you don't stay to get burned again. You stopped romanticizing potential. That shift right there changed everything. You no longer fall for what someone could be. You pay attention to what they consistently show you. You've learned that inconsistency is a decision, and someone who confuses you over and over again isn't worth clarity from you anymore. Now your love looks different. It's not given out of fear or loneliness. It's offered with intention. It has standards, requirements, not walls but gates, and only those who come with respect, honesty, and effort get in. That change wasn't easy, but it was necessary, and they notice. The narcissist especially, because control doesn't work on someone who's no longer afraid to lose people. That's your power now. Detachment from dysfunction. You don't chase what drains you. You don't argue with what confuses you. You observe, decide, and move on. No drama, no noise, just action. There's a quiet freedom in not being triggered anymore. You still feel, you still care, but you don't spiral. You breathe, you pause, you think. That pause used to be a place of guilt. Now it's a place of peace. You don't rush to fix what isn't yours anymore. Healing taught you that love isn't meant to confuse. It's not meant to leave you questioning your worth at the end of every conversation. It's not a roller coaster of highs and lows, apologies and silence, affection and neglect. Love, real love, is calm, steady, clear, and now you're finally ready for it. The power you carry now can't be seen, but it's felt. It shows up in your tone, your choices, your distance. It's not about proving a point, it's about protecting your energy. You've learned to walk away before it costs you your peace. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And the people who once manipulated your emotions, they don't know what to do with this version of you. The version that doesn't explain, that doesn't chase, that doesn't entertain cycles anymore. Because when you stop dancing for their approval, the music stops, and all they're left with is silence. They never thought you'd stop explaining yourself. They were so used to the version of you that always wanted to be understood, even by those who never deserved to hear your voice. But now, the silence speaks for you, and it's louder than your words ever were. You've learned that peace isn't passive. It's earned. Every boundary, every decision, every no that once made you feel guilty, they were steps toward this version of you. The one who doesn't break under pressure, who doesn't collapse just because someone else can't handle your distance. The people who played with your empathy now feel its absence. They feel the space you created, not to punish, but to breathe, to think, to rebuild. And in that space, you found something they never expected: clarity. Without the noise, you started hearing yourself again. It's not revenge. That was never your goal. You just wanted peace. But the irony is, your peace is the thing they can't stand, because it's proof that you didn't need them to heal. You didn't need closure. You didn't need their approval. You just needed time and the courage to use it. And now, when you walk into rooms, you carry that stillness. You don't announce your growth. You don't prove your worth. You simply exist, fully, unapologetically. And it unnerves them. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're unaffected. They used to count on your triggers. Push the right buttons, watch you explode, then play victim. But now, those buttons don't respond. You've rewired yourself. You're no longer performing for anyone's dysfunction. And that shift? That's the end of their script. You used to fear being misunderstood. Now, you welcome it. Because you've realized that not everyone is meant to understand you, especially those committed to twisting your truth. You stopped offering clarity where confusion was always the goal. You started keeping your energy for people who see you without effort. And it's wild how quiet life becomes when drama isn't chasing you anymore. When you stop answering every call for chaos. When your silence becomes your boundary and your distance becomes your protection. You're not running, you're resting. And rest has never felt so powerful. They'll call it cold. Say you changed. Blame your growth for their discomfort. But that's not your burden to carry. You didn't change overnight. You just stopped shrinking. You stopped betraying yourself to keep peace with people who thrived on war. This is what healing really looks like. Not perfection, but awareness. You still feel it all. The disappointment, the memories, the old wounds. But now they don't dictate your choices. You feel it, process it, and move forward anyway. That's power. That's freedom. And you no longer try to fix what broke you. You just leave it behind. Not bitter, just done. You've realized that closure isn't something they give. It's something you create. Quietly, for yourself. Because your healing doesn't need their permission. They had access to the most fragile version of you, and still broke it. Now that version is gone. And the one that replaced it? That version doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't entertain. That version builds. And it builds in silence. You stop looking for signs. That's one of the biggest shifts. You no longer wait for the universe to validate your gut. You just listen to your body, your energy, the weight in your chest when something doesn't feel right. That's your answer now, not their excuses, not their charm. They used to manipulate your hope, twist your loyalty into something they could control. But now, you don't hope for their change anymore. You expect nothing. And from that emptiness, you finally have space to fill yourself. Fully, honestly, without illusion. The narcissist depends on patterns. Same words, same moves, same cycle. They count on your memory being short and your heart being soft. But you've been through it enough times to see the trap before you step into it. You've stopped confusing pain with love. That clarity, it's everything. And now you don't fear distance. You don't feel the need to keep broken people close just to feel whole. You found wholeness in solitude, in stillness, in the quiet realization that some connections were chains, not bonds. Letting go doesn't feel like loss anymore. It feels like freedom. They're still watching, waiting for the crack in your calm, the slip in your silence. But you've made peace your foundation now. You don't perform. You don't react. And that restraint, that unshakable calm, it drives them insane. This version of you doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't explain to people who never listened when you were crying out loud. You speak differently now, with your absence, with your boundaries, with the unapologetic way you choose yourself even when it makes others uncomfortable. You've learned that love without respect is a slow form of self-destruction. And now, you don't accept love that makes you question your worth. You stopped choosing people who never chose you properly. And that shift, that quiet refusal to accept less, it rewrites your entire story. You walk away now with peace instead of pieces. You don't slam the door. You don't make a scene. You just go. Because what you're building inside doesn't require an audience, it just needs space. And you've made room for yourself by removing everyone who once crowded your clarity. They can't reach you anymore. Not really. They might try, but the version of you that used to open every message, answer every call, overthink every word, that version is no longer available. You've outgrown their reach. And growth? It's lonely sometimes, but it's never empty. You fill that space with truth, with rest, with deeper connections that don't require you to earn love by sacrificing parts of yourself. You no longer fear being alone, because now, your own presence is enough. This kind of strength doesn't look like the movies. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's in the mornings where you no longer wake up with anxiety. In the conversations where you don't feel like you're walking on glass. In the relationships that don't ask you to abandon yourself. You don't owe anyone the broken version of you they loved. You don't owe them another chance to pull you back into a cycle you barely survived. What you owe is to yourself. To protect your peace. To honor your growth. To never go back to what almost destroyed you. They thought your silence was temporary, that you were just playing a role. But now they're starting to realize this isn't a pause. It's a permanent shift. You didn't just walk away. You disconnected. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And once that happens, there's no script left for them to follow. You used to explain your boundaries like they were negotiable. Like maybe, just maybe, someone would understand if you said it gently enough. But now, you state them. One time. Calmly. Firmly. And if someone can't handle that, they're not meant to be near you anymore. This version of you doesn't fight to be chosen. You know what you bring. You know what you deserve. You don't sit around hoping someone wakes up and treats you right. You move. Quietly. With purpose. With peace. Because you've wasted too much time hoping people would change for the better. They notice you don't react anymore. That no matter how many times they bait you, poke at old wounds, bring up the past, you stay still. That calm burns them more than any words could, because it means they no longer control the narrative. You do. And the moment you took that back, everything changed. They can't gaslight silence. They can't manipulate what doesn't engage. And when you don't respond, they're left face to face with themselves. And the truth is, they never had power. You just gave it to them. That part hurts. But it also frees you. You've stopped apologizing for protecting your energy. You don't feel bad for saying no, for walking away, for not explaining yourself anymore. You've stopped carrying guilt for choosing your peace over someone else's chaos. That shift cost you people, but it saved you. Now the only version of yourself you entertain is the one aligned with your peace. Not the people pleaser. Not the one who stayed out of fear. The one who chose healing. Who built boundaries out of survival and then realized boundaries are not walls, they're doors that lock from the inside. And when you finally locked it, they knocked louder, got angrier, desperate. But not because they love you, because they lost access. You were never their home. You were their power source. And now they're in the dark, fumbling for control that no longer exists. There's strength in walking away, but there's power in not turning back. You didn't close the door to be chased. You closed it because your sanity is not a discussion. And now they know. They feel it in your absence. In the way you don't ask, don't beg, don't check in. You've moved on, without the need to announce it. That's the part that haunts them. Not your anger, not your pain, your indifference. The way your silence says, "I've said all I needed to." And they replay every moment, looking for the opening that no longer exists. But you've outgrown the loop. The cycle ends with you. And as you rebuild, you realize the version of you they lost, that version doesn't even exist anymore. You're not healing to become who you were. You're healing to become someone you've never met before. And that unknown version of you, that's who they'll never get close to again. So let them wonder. Let them sit with the echo of what they destroyed. Because now you're building something sacred, quiet, strong, unshakable. And it doesn't require their presence. It never did. You're no longer the one holding the door open. That part of you, the one who waited, who hoped, who kept space for someone who only brought storms, is gone. You didn't close the door with anger. You closed it with clarity. And that's what makes it final. It's wild how many people loved you more when you didn't love yourself. When you overgave, overexplained, overstayed. They fed off that version because it was easier to control. But now you've flipped the dynamic. And they don't know how to exist in your new reality. They say you've changed. But what really happened is, you woke up. You stopped performing. Stopped making yourself small to be liked. You found your own rhythm, and it no longer matches theirs. And when they say you're different, that's exactly the point. You are different. By design. You don't crave closure anymore, because you've accepted that some people are incapable of giving it. They weren't confused. They weren't unaware. They just didn't care enough. And that's not bitterness, and that's truth. You've stopped making excuses for the inexcusable, and it's freeing, not needing to understand their actions, not needing to justify their silence, not waiting for the apology that was never coming. You've turned that waiting time into rebuilding time. And now the only thing you wait for is your next move. They don't see it coming. That level of emotional detachment, that refusal to re-engage. Because they thought the cycle would continue. They thought they'd always have a piece of you. But you've taken all those pieces back, quietly, one boundary at a time, and you walk differently now, not with arrogance, but with assurance. There's a steadiness in your presence that wasn't there before, a peace that no longer depends on external behavior. You're not reacting anymore. You're observing, choosing, and protecting. The narcissist hates this version of you. Because there's no entrance left, no loophole, no guilt. They relied on your emotional responses, your fear of being abandoned, your need to explain yourself. But you've disconnected the wires. They press the same buttons and then nothing happens. It drives them crazy. Your silence, your indifference, your distance. Because the person they once controlled doesn't exist anymore. And what remains? Untouchable. Because you're no longer running on desperation. You're running on self-respect. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. You weren't trying to win against them, you were trying to win yourself back. And now that you've got you, fully, completely, there's no space left for what once drained you. You don't hate them. That's the part they can't grasp. You just don't need them. You don't think about them. Don't feel pulled back. You're not angry. You're empty of expectations. And that void, that clean space, that's where your peace lives now. And no, you don't miss who they were. You miss who you were before they got inside your mind. But now you've returned, not as you were, as who you were always meant to be, before the manipulation, before the doubt, before the emotional theft. And that person is untouchable.